Right, great. Yeah, that was, I think, what I was trying to get to is how many external contributors do we have in AutoSD, in the Automotive SIG? And then for the participants in the Automotive SIG, if we are using something from upstream, whatever it is, OS build or CentOS or whatever, if we want to change something for our benefit, we're doing that in the upstream and then it comes down, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the ideal for sure. You know, we would contribute it upstream and work until it is accepted upstream. And the change filters back down to us, and then it's maintained upstream and away from us.
Right, great. And we're trying to mimic that with docs. So we're trying to do docs as code and do the same thing. So so I guess then the next question is then when things occur in the upstream, and Leonardo kind of gave me the impression that it kind of sounds like it's a monitoring manual sort of thing. But when things change in CentOS, when things change in OS build, you guys are monitoring that, and then you're just deciding when you're going to pull down the next iteration of whatever changes came from those communities? Or is there some sort of automation that does that for you?
If you're talking like a packaging updating from CentOS upstream, that's something that we use the same build system, so we get chose updates for free in this case because it's all it's got the same build system for us. But let's say we get to us build updates on the same way because it's built on our build system as well. So when we just have to, we don't need to worry about us build updates. If we do an update in our developer machine, we get those updates automatically. But so we get updates for free. But it's not like we get them automatically. We need to be aware there's an update and then update it ourselves.
Right, because there's some sort of evaluation step, right, that AutoSD maintainers need to perform before they accept.
Yeah.
Got it. That was very enlightening. Thank you.
It may get a little bit more complicated also. Sophie now has a published specification, and so up until now we have not really been complying with a spec because there hasn't been a spec to comply with. We've been really following what they've been doing with their reference implementation EWAL. And now that there is a specification, we can comply with that. And at some point there will also be automated tools for compliance that we'll be able to follow and just work those into our CI/CD system, and presumably other distros will as well. I know that Eclipse also has aspirations towards something along those lines as well. They're at least they will be doing a reference implementation. It's called LIDA. I don't know whether they're going to be focusing on compliance tools necessarily, because there probably won't be a written spec in the same way that there is with Sophie.
Yeah, their Eclipse is more get your hands-on work, where Sophie is more specification talking. It just happens that they started working, implementing a specification before writing the specification itself.
Yeah, and that's actually very common. It's not uncommon to do that at all, to test things out in code as you go. You know, it can actually make the specifications process a lot faster.
But then now that you have a specification, you kind of have a reference to what the image should, from a document standpoint. And then they're already working on tools to test some of their stack. So I'll expect more tools they're also open to contributions from other groups, just like ourselves, each chose tools. But that's very similar with OS build. We would contribute upstream and then we get chose back manually later. There's no automated process for it. Especially in this case, they are only relevant to Sophie. So
and Sophie as a project also has expressed a desire, and they've been taking steps to work directly with other projects like Covisa and Eclipse SDV. So Yeah, it's basically one big mess of soup. Okay, cool. Anything
Thanks,
else
Al.
you'd like to cover, or you want to? Otherwise, we can move on to actually the slides that I even prepared for today. If I can find the right button. We will see. You guys. So I think I only have just an agenda and maybe one technical status slide today. We actually just talked all about documentation resources. As far as SOFI images, I did want to bring up the SOFI specification, which is here. Post this in the little chat here. This is what the specification looks like. You can see that it's got an architecture overview and a whole bunch of placeholders. There's a lot of challenges ahead that are not yet completed. But you can see that there's also a section called DevOps in the cloud. So so I think that it's going to be a very interesting ride with SOFI. One of the difficulties of developing a specification is that you can create all the code you want in your reference implementation, but that's specific. That's just one thing that you're building. And a specification needs to be more general. It needs to allow the flexibility of other implementations that also comply. For example, SOFI's reference implementation is source-based. You build everything from the ground up using Yocto project. And that is the traditional way that embedded systems have been built for decades. And it's not the way that we build AutoSD at all, or any of the Red Hat stuff. So making our stuff comply with their stuff or our stuff comply with this specification is sort of a challenge. It's also, that means it's incumbent on the folks writing the specification to write it in such a way that it can accommodate, ideas other than the ones that they come up with. So anyway, so that is available. See a lot of folks joining. I really want to apologize again for the mix-up with the calendar entries. I know the calendar entries were changed on my calendar, and evidently that did not filter out to other people, and I don't exactly know how that is. But I will be redoing them after this call. I see a number of new people joining because it's 1:30, and it sounds like some people got the calendar updates and some didn't, which is a little bit embarrassing. But thank you, Felicia. Bye. Great discussion on documentation and also the upstream process.
Hey, Jeffrey.
Yes, John.
I'm looking at my calendar and I now see that there is a invite for this meeting at 1:30. I think the problem, at least for me, is that the original one that started at the hour was not deleted. So that
Really?
might be what's going on for other folks too, is the original wasn't replaced. And so, I just naturally joined when I saw the reminder pop up. So that might be what everyone needs to do, is just delete the one that starts at the top of the hour and keep the one at 1:30.
I will go back and Steve only sees the one for the top of the hour. So I will go back and delete everything and reshoot it. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but you know what? If calendar entries were easy, then we probably wouldn't have jobs.
Okay, but this is not a one-time change. Going forward, you want this meeting to start at 1:30. Is that correct?
That was the intent. If
Okay.
people don't think that's going to leave enough time, I can probably still maintain it at the earlier hour. I have a conflict now that normally pops up at 7 a.m. on Wednesdays. So at least at 7 a.m. my time. So, but I will. Yeah, let's. It might actually be easier to just go back and do it continue it at 7. So I may have to go and move my conflict into the automotive calendar within Red Hat. You mean? Yeah, there actually is a copy of this within the Red Hat calendar, and I remember changing that one as well. But
The one in the Red Hat calendar is half an hour earlier,
is it?
so it's 7
Okay.
a.m. Yeah.
All right. Well, apparently my calendar foo has failed me dramatically today.
Calendaring is hard.
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it is. It shouldn't be hard in the 21st century, that's for sure.
You would guess, right?
Yeah. So, Pierre and Leo, we have room for a technical update. I don't think that the slide has been, we don't have anything on the slide. But if there's anything that you'd like to walk us through with recent changes to CentOS or to AutoSD, we would love to hear about it.
I don't have much on my side, but I think there was some updates from our engagements with other communities.
Sure. So I have some updates with Sophie and Integration Lab overall. So I've been working on testing AutoSD in Sophie's Integration Lab with their CI system that's called Lava. So Lava works in a different way where you can actually attach hardware to it wherever that hardware is. So I've been using a local machine of mine to do tests on an x86 machine using QEMU. Just to press the job definition itself, it's work. The job itself is working at this point. So we are now working on using a AVA platform with a machine from that ARM will make available to us to run tests with using ARM system ready, and it's what being using Sophie for UL building and testing. The machine is being shipped to the US at this point. It may take at least 2 weeks to get everything sorted out. But what basically we plan once have all set in a data center is to hook that machine up to the integration lab and run tests, and we can run automated CI tests. Be it nightly, every pull request for a software image and so on. And at the same time, that chose test will be using scripts and tools that are provided by Linaro itself and Sophie. So that means we will be going to test our images using upstream Sophie tools, which aligns with the goal of making our Sophie AutoSD Sophie image Sophie compliant according to their specification and reference implementation. I'm also packaging Lava itself in Fedora. They have so Lava is basically they have the way that you hook up your hardware with their system, you have to use what they call a Lava dispatcher, which is basically a daemon that you run on your builder machine. That's only available on Debian. So I'm packaging it on, make it available as in a proper repository for both Fedora and CentOS. So we can use that on our on our platform as well. My last update for Sophie is that I'm also working on Sophie Blueprint to use the Kubernetes files to define the application workload. So that's basically getting what we do with Quadlet, but abstracting into a blueprint and exemplify how you can use the same workload to test your application in the cloud, run it on UL using K3s, and run it in AutoSD using Quadlet and Hirte. So that means it's a blueprint about using Kubernetes YAML files to deploy application different environments, runtimes, implementations, etc. That will also be using Integration Lab under testing tools. So it's kind of a big blueprint, but most folks are interested. And I know that Linaro has started to use Podman and Quadlet on some of their tests because it's way more lightweight than K3s. So they are very open to what we are doing at this point, which is quite nice. That's all for Sophie. I have one update for Eclipse, which I saw that Eclipse is trying to build an end-to-end story using Cuxa and Chariot, got early stage testing and so on. So I'm taking a look at those two projects, what it takes to build, test, and run them in our AutoSD image. So this most likely those projects will be our next targets to enable in our AutoSD Eclipse SDV image. Those are my updates.
That's fantastic. Working with external communities like this is one of the prime goals of this SIG that we set out over a year ago. So it's really great to see that work. Yes, Pierre.
I actually have one thing that I realize I should mention. IRTO is now available on all Fedora branches. So if you're running Fedora 36, 37, the future 38, or even Rawhide, you can DNF install IRTO and get the 0.1 release that has been published a few weeks ago.
Just going to post the links to here on GitHub or GitLab.
It's on GitHub. GitHub containers, GitHub. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, for Leo, do you have a list of differences for the pipeline that's building all the images and the differences for building the Sophie image? And is any of that stuff that is expected to be adopted by the broader product pipeline for creating all the images, or are we focusing it on just the Sophie images?
So far, the only change is the application stack that's been there with Saltware. There's not much. I don't think there's any peculiarity that would make a difference for the sample images.
Okay.
Most, if there is a requirement, for example, like how the kernel should, or how boot speed or anything like that, that's supported by Sophie, it's most likely to be changed in the upstream auto kernel anyway. So I don't think there'll be any differences from this on that level from the sample image that we currently have.
But there's nothing like, what Jeffro mentioned earlier, how the spec there, leads you more towards a Yocto build implementation rather than assembling all these with the built RPMs, right? So like we're not changing the source of.
No,
okay.
That's the point of for Sophie to have testing tools. So they chose tools will test the resultant image for EWAL or Yocto and AutoSD. Doesn't matter how it was built. It matters as the end result, and those tools will measure and assert if it is compliant with the specification.
Okay, great. Thanks.
A good way to picture that also is to realize that Sophie is not going to be solely open source. Sophie itself as a specification is open source, but it would be very easy for something like QNX to also comply with the Sophie specification. In fact, that since BlackBerry is a member, that is actually one of their goals. So I expect that there will be a number of different, very widely varying operating systems that will comply with SOFI. Eclipse SDV will be a little bit different. Eclipse is very open source focused, so I have a feeling that that one will probably just be Linux and possibly some other open source operating systems, maybe like Zephyr. But we shall see. As you say, these projects are still there. You know, Eclipse SDV is only about 14 months old, so they are definitely in their infancy. One other thing about Eclipse SDV, also, while we're still talking about external communities, is that they did just have a community day. It was actually 2 days full of updates and information about the projects within Eclipse SDV, and I believe that those are set to be published between. I believe they're supposed to be out by Friday. So keep an eye on the Eclipse SDV website, and I'm sure that that will be updated to show. And it's also there's some really great stuff going on in that project. If you have the time and inclination, you know, everybody is welcome. Okay, well, we've got a technical update. We've talked about SOFI. We've talked about documentation. Pierre, do we have anything new to report on hardware support?
Nope, unfortunately not yet.
It is a
work in progress.
Yeah, it is a complicated process inside Red Hat to build out this stuff. So
I do believe we found the right person we finally found the right person to talk with. We've had a couple of meetings already, and we need to follow up on that. But we haven't raised a point where we can actually report on something concrete.
okay.
We've met people, we've had meetings. Woohoo! Seems a little bit short.
One thing that I suppose I could throw out there to folks like John, who I know is from TI, and anybody else who has an interest in supporting AutoSD on their hardware, is that we could talk about that. We can talk about that in the documentation for AutoSD. There's nothing stopping us from saying which, you know, we may not be able to host those changes within the CentOS framework yet. But as far as seeing whether it works, we would love to have that available and to take a look at it. So, John, I don't know how are you having any issues getting AutoSD working on the platform that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I have a lot of comments, and I want to be careful to separate the ones that are specific to AutoSD in this group and the ones that are just Fedora in general. Okay, and just give you a understanding. So I'm attempting to get the AutoSD to work on one of our TI platforms, and you know, step one is I made sure I knew how to build it correctly for Raspberry Pi, and then I went to build it for our platform and running into problems in boot, and so I want to debug and investigate, and immediately wanting to swap out debug versions of the U-boot or kernel or whatever, and all that ability to change the composition of the built image requires that I understand OS build MPP, which requires that I understand the whole concept of how images are put together in the Red Hat Fedora ecosystem, which also requires understanding of RPM and package management and where all the repos are and just what the flow is. And that, honestly, for me, has been like a completely new world, and a very overwhelming. And in some places, great documentation. In some places, I've learned that you got to go look at the code if you really want to understand how things work. And so it's been a and I come from the Yocto world, where even in Yocto, I'm not an expert, but that's the background I have. And so it's been in short, it's been a very steep learning curve. is what I'm trying to say. Now, a lot of that is just because I'm completely new to the Fedora world. And so a bit of that is just, natural getting up to speed on how things work. But some of it is, how would one go about porting a new device to the AutoSD build flow, and how would they go about debugging it, and creating a debug environment for that is probably more specific to AutoSD than it is just generic Fedora learning that that I think would be helpful. I'm sure other people are going to want to port their devices and probably going to run into the same questions, the same learning curve that I'm going through right now.
I think it's a great summary, and you're definitely pointing out, it is an extremely complex thing, and I'm actually relatively new to the Red Hat stuff too. I don't know if everybody on the call knows, but I helped launch and run the Octo project for a number of years, and so I come from an embedded background with where when you build something, you build it from source.
Correct. Yeah, it was very difficult. I mean, to really grasp where's the source and who's building this. Wait a minute,
and how do I trust these binary components that are
exactly
just living in a library somewhere? And so that is a big shift. I found it easiest to understand by understanding that this whole system that Red Hat has put together over the last 30 years is really been focused on the data center and had the needs of the data center using DevOps tools, as opposed to the embedded world, which is building one tiny little thing and then replicating it many times. So yeah, and I think that it would be great for us to develop some documentation specific to AutoSD that maybe kind of covers that. I see Laura on the call. Maybe we can talk about different ways that we could approach that, and maybe put together a tutorial that can walk through what it's like to port from one thing to another.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I just think of some common scenarios, like I'm sure that people who are developing run into an issue and go, oh, I need to modify, I want to swap out the kernel with one I just rebuilt that has some instrumentation or some printf statements, whatever, added in there, and you want to easily swap those out into the image to be able and build it and run it and debug it. And I am sure people maybe on this call do this every day, and it's like, obvious to them, but that kind of stuff, I don't find any guidance anywhere. So I'm kind of learning it on my own, and it seems like something that we could document.
This
I
also
actually have a start of a document that does exactly this, Jonathan, based on Jonathan, Jeffrey, and I had a meeting a while back to help him getting started, and based on the discussion I had in my to-do notebook to write something for you, and I have started. It's a page long at the moment. It's really not in the stage where it would satisfy any of the things, but I have not forgotten that we had discussed this. I had it on my to-do list to do, and I had started.
Okay, I look forward to that, and if you want to send me a preview, I'll take a look.
We'll do that.
Okay.
I'm still setting up the context on what's a binary distribution versus source distribution. That's how far along I've been.
Okay, I've gotten past that now. I'm comfortable
is
now with the different RPM package types and all that. So I've gotten beyond that, but I definitely look forward to what you have.
And once we have something, I may actually ask you to pull in your notes and thoughts. It's just make it in the open and have it shared documents.
I think that would be great. It would be obviously a really great addition to AutoSD, or to the Automotive SIG. Eric has some comments here in the chat. That Eric, do you want to talk?
Yeah, no. I've always found it's actually a little easier if for me, everyone's different. But I've always found it's a little easier when doing ARM enablement if you enable in Fedora first, because obviously we have an upstream first focus, but that's not the only reason. I actually find it easier because you have the recent kernels. There's more tools available. There's people use U-boot and all these various bootloaders. So often I find it's easier to get it working there first, and you don't have to worry about backporting or any of that because it's all up to date. And then once you have Fedora booting, just try and backport those to AutoSD. At least,
Yes. So
yeah.
I did actually take that approach, and I do have Fedora working well on this platform. I did that first, but now when I build with the OS build flow, there's something different, and I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, Eric, you still need to generate the image to flash on the system. So you still need to understand how you build the OS image. How did you do that for Fedora, actually, Jonathan?
Yeah, you have to do it for Fedora and AutoSD. You have to do it for both. Sometimes I just find there's less hurdles in Fedora because the software is more up to date. And actually, there's a larger selection of tools. There's about, I've seen people build Fedora with about 3 or 4 different tools. So if there's one somebody feels comfortable with, they can at least build Fedora using that. Then of course they still have to learn how to use OS build and all that stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, and actually, to be more precise in my statement, now you say this, what I did on Fedora actually is I can use the pre-built images for ARM platforms, particularly targeted for the Raspberry Pi, and I can get them to work well on the TI platform. I'm not rebuilding the Fedora image, and that probably would be a good exercise to do. Because I suspect it's probably some issue in the way I am building it for the AutoSD that's creating this problem that I'm seeing.
It may actually not be that useful because I expect Fedora doesn't use the same doesn't use OS build to build its images by the public one. The one you've tested with isn't built with OS build. But I believe there is support for Fedora images in OS Builder, but I don't know that they would give you the so image builder. Sorry, image builder is the layer on top of OS build that provides the nice user interface and everything. But I don't know if rebuilding the Fedora image, the Fedora IoT image, would actually gain you much. That's what I was trying to connect to. But no, it's a steep learning curve. I agree with that.
One thing I would also point out is that a lot of the tools developed in Fedora and CentOS and RHEL as well were originally developed on x86 to be deployed into data centers, and the ARM world is completely different. You know, the ARM world is nowhere near as standardized as x86, and it's nowhere near as backward compatible. You know, ARM v5, ARM v7 are completely different architectures. So yeah, it will be good for us to kind of get this stuff down on paper, or in words, I guess is a better way to put it. So fantastic. All right. Well, we have actually covered a lot of the stuff in the agenda. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? We've got about 5 minutes left before I go and completely dismantle my calendar. Okay. Well, I did have extended use cases down there. I'm not sure. I don't actually have a whole lot baked to announce or discuss. I don't have anything to announce, actually. But I do want to just mention that it has been really interesting that we have had some queries about AutoSD because it is essentially a streamlined, boiled down version of CentOS Stream with a very specific kernel. That particular use case is very interesting to other things besides automotive. It's it's not what I would call small enough to fit into an IoT use case, but it certainly is small enough to fit into an edge use case, where if you're building an edge device that is going to have some intelligence out at the edge that's going to communicate back to a cloud-based resource, that you can split the workload between those things, and it's actually much easier to do that with a small streamlined operating system that only has the basics, that isn't embedded. And so what I'm seeing is that there is a need for something like this. You know, it is of great interest to a number of different use cases. Some of them actually still in transportation. So we're proceeding, and you know, certainly AutoSD is available and can be used for whatever anybody wants it to. And I don't know if any of the people who contacted me over the last couple of weeks are on the call, but if you are, you know, let's talk about your use case. We'd be happy to pull it out and disassemble it and see if there's anything we can do in AutoSD to help enable it. And otherwise, I think that we've pretty much got our agenda for the month. I will fix the calendar, and if anybody has anything that they would like to add to it, or if you'd like to bring something up to the meeting to discuss, just send me a note, drop me a note in chat. I'd be happy to put it on the agenda for next month. And with that, I will give everybody back 2 minutes before their next meeting. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good